Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's going to be an interesting video. I'm actually going to be responding to another YouTuber's video, Midwest Backpacker. Jeremy put out his video about hot tent camping, and in it he does a pretty good number on saying that it sucks. And so his conclusions I'd like to refute in this video. It's nothing against Jeremy. In fact, he's got an excellent channel. You should go check it out. I think he has excellent content. But I just disagree with him on this point, and I'd like to explain why. Alright guys, so before we get into all the points, I do want to tell you that I have done cold camping and I have done hot tent camping quite a bit. So I do have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about here. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number one, do we spend too much time in our hot tents? Well, Jeremy thinks so. He believes that because we have a hot tent that people will go to bed earlier, people will stay in their tents later in the morning, and that they won't be outside as much. I do believe his initial assessment is correct. Yes, there will be more time spent in the hot tent because you have a hot tent. However, I do want to explain how that's not a negative. The pros to hot tent camping is you have a place to spend at night where you are warm. Because you're in the hot tent, people aren't going to go to bed earlier. Now, they might go into the hot tent earlier because it's cold out. Around a fire, you're just not as warm as you are in a hot tent. So because of the hot tent, when it gets dark, and it does get dark early in winter, sometimes 5 o'clock it's already pitch black out there. So you want a place that you're going to be warm and you're going to be able to hang out for a decent amount of time with your friends that you went out with. Yeah, you're missing out on some of the stars and stuff when you're in the hot tent, but that's why you go back out. You don't stay in the hot tent the whole time. You can go out, you can look at the stars, you can hang out there knowing that the hot tent is already warm, already comfortable. All you got to do is walk back in there and you're all set to go. So it's really not a negative at night by any means. Now, in the morning time, I still don't see it as a problem, because normally people in cold camping will want to stay in their hammock or stay in their tent because it's just warm in there, and it's tough to get that initial jump up out of bed feeling. You want to get coffee, you want to get things going, you want to get into something warm, but you've been sleeping without warm clothes. In a hot tent, all those problems go away. You start up that stove, you get it going in the morning, and you're all ready to go. And you can go for an adventure. You don't have to stay in the hot tent. So really the perfect scenario is to have day hikes planned or to have some sort of adventure planned. You just got to be willing and able to get out of that hot tent and actually go for that adventure. That's on you. Number two, it's heavy. The claim that it is heavy to carry out these hot tent setups is somewhat true. However, his claims that it's 25, 50, 75 pounds heavier than a normal loadout is just simply not true. The issue that he brings up is how Miyagi, his setup when they were going out there was like 200 pounds or something, his sled. And the bottom line with that is you carry too much stuff in. See, what happens is when you have a hot tent, you start off with a normal tent, and a little small stove, and then what ends up happening is you start building onto that because you want to just be more and more comfortable. And that's really where the weight and everything comes from. If you keep it light, you can actually have a very easy setup, especially if you go with a titanium stove. Sometimes these weigh as little as 3-4 pounds, and your tent is really negligible as far as how much more it weighs. Definitely a little heavier than a Cuban fiber tarp, but you're talking about a pound. You're not talking about 25, 50 pounds here. Now, if you start adding in all those extras like better cooking devices and different things, you know, you want a full-size axe instead of a pack axe. You want, you know, whatever it is. Well, those are luxury items that have nothing to do with the hot tent part. Those are things you would bring anyway if you were going to process firewood for your communal fire ring. So those are things, and for cooking, you're going to cook either way. Those are items that no matter what, you can decide to bring or not to bring. If you feel that it's too heavy to bring all that extra stuff, keep it simple and bring some backpacking meals. You know, bring what you would normally bring if you were cold camping, but you got a hot tent. There's really not much of an extra weight. Now, granted, I've got different setups for different adventures, and I could tell you some of the hot tent stuff that I have is very heavy. Yeah, you can get a 35-pound stove. You can get a 65-pound tent. Those are for car camping. Those are for luxury camping. But if you're trying to go backpacking and all you got is a sled, you can go with a titanium stove and be just as fine. Keep in mind that it might not be as luxurious, but that's the point. You're backpacking. You're not trying to have luxury. All right, number 3, all the work involved, your setup process. So the claim that it takes longer than any other setup is, again, slightly valid, but blown way out of proportion because of his experience with the people that he went with. So you don't need to have a hot tent that takes forever to set up. You can get a teepee tent that doesn't take that long, definitely not much longer than any other ground setup in the winter. Especially if you're going to bring a big enough tent to share with multiple people. Well, those people should be helping you not only just pack in the gear, which helps with heavy weight, but also set up. Your setup needs to be done with multiple people if the tent is set up for multiple people. Now, granted, you get into an issue where if you've got a big tent, you need a bigger stove. If you got a small tent, just a small stove. So the more scalability you get, the bigger that this stuff gets, the more people that should be able to use that space and help with with carrying it in and setup. Now, as far as time-wise goes, it's like anything else. When you first start hammock camping, I personally know I've watched people struggle to set up their hammock for long periods of time. I know it took me a long time to get that kind of figured out, get it adjusted, figure out what works for me, what doesn't work for me. But once I had it dialed in, I got much better at it. And it's the same thing with hot tents. All you got to do is learn the gear you have. And if you learn it, it'll be way faster. Now, you can help yourself out by getting some more simple setups. For instance, Tim, on one of our adventures, he was the first one to do the pop open tent with the ice rigs, the ice huts. And that was mind-blowing how easy that whole setup was. Now, the stove portion of the setup is really not as complicated as you'd think. So depending on the stove you get, it can be harder or easier. But again, you got to know the equipment you buy and buy what you are willing to deal with. They make titanium lightweight stoves that you can put together, which I personally would not recommend. But they also have titanium stoves that just open up and you flip things and it just locks into place and you're all set. Those are a little bit easier. You can also bring a stove that doesn't require any setup besides the stovepipe. Now, when you do that and you have to try to level it, he talks about how leveling can be a problem. The stove isn't the problem. The stove, you can put pieces of wood, rock, you can do whatever you got to do to try to get that part level. And that's actually not that difficult. So when the snow starts to melt, yeah, you'll probably have to adjust these things. But to me, that's a small price to pay and really doesn't take any effort. It's just a quick adjustment on whatever you have stacked underneath. Number 4, firewood. All right, this one's definitely just dead wrong. I'm sorry, but gathering firewood is no different than if you were cold camping or hot tent camping, minus if you don't make a fire at all, if you're cold camping. Somebody like Shug, all right, he goes out sometimes, never even makes a fire, or he makes a very small fire for just like an hour or so. So he'll see a big difference. But for the vast majority of people winter camping, they're making a fire at night. And if that's what you're going to do, there's no way that you need to gather more wood to stay warm outside than having a hot tent to stay warm inside the hot tent. The hot tent will keep that heat, that radiant heat inside a lot longer than just being out in the open. So if you want to be in there with your socks off and just hanging with your shirt off and everything, yeah, you're going to need to go through some firewood. But if you compare apples to apples and you just want to stay warm enough that you're not freezing out there, it's very, very easy. You take a tree, you process that firewood, and you can stay very warm. And the scalability with that. So if you have a big hot tent or a small hot tent will depend on how big your stove is and how much wood you need. However, if you have a big setup, that would mean you would have more people in that setup to help you. So if you're getting the biggest setup you can get and going out solo, yeah, you're going to be working a lot harder than you want to be. Still probably about the same anyway, being outside. But you don't need to work that hard if you keep your setup for the amount of people that will be there. In addition, you really don't want to be making a fire to be shared outside when you guys are going to be hanging out inside. One of the other pros to having the hot tent is you can cook inside the hot tent. So there's no reason to make another fire outside if you can cook and do everything you need in the hot tent. So don't waste your time making these big fires outside and gathering firewood for it when you have a hot tent. Utilize what you've brought out. Also, something that'll help keep your wood processing down is at nighttime, don't run the stove all night. You've got to pack in, either way, you've got to pack in your warm gear. So pack it in, this just like you would with cold camping, and you set that up so that way you'll be warm at night. That's not where you're cold. And you should sleep warm at night without the fire. It's that time that you're up trying to hang out with people that you really need that firewood to be processed for, so you are not cold and you're not miserable out there. Number 5. All right, you got me on this one, Jeremy. It's definitely not cheap to get into hot tenting, especially if you don't know what you're doing yet, because you're going to probably buy a stove that you think is great, doesn't work. You buy a tent you think is great, doesn't end up working. You're going to have the same problems as, if you were starting out hammock camping and there was no YouTube channel to look at on how to do it. You're going to have trial and error. So I agree, yes, it can be expensive. All right, the last thing that he did say in his video that I wanted to kind of get into was the claim that the hot tents that are built for hammocks are not really good, a good setup. And although they can be tough if you're planning on staying in there super warm all night, if you bring a 30-degree setup and you got to keep that whole hammock area warm, yeah, he's right. It's a bigger setup, and you're going to need a big stove and a lot more firewood to do that. But what I've done is I will set that hammock up, or set it up solo, and I will go to sleep in my hammock without needing any stove running at all. It's no different than cold camping. If you're not hanging out with anybody else and it's a solo trip, you can actually get into your hammock and just watch the fire inside your hot tent. It's actually really nice. Alright, so those are all my rebuttals. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, comment, and just stay tuned. I'll be putting out a lot more content specifically on hot tent camping because I have learned quite a bit. Stay tuned.